For the YMCA, reaching out to soldiers in need was nothing new. More than 5,000 Y volunteers had worked the battlefields, hospitals, and POW camps of the Civil War, including poet Walt Whitman.
They're actually performing surgery in some cases. They're providing nursing services. They're writing letters for the soldiers, many who, of course, are illiterate. They're providing stamps. But most importantly, I think, on the federal side, is they're listing the dead, and they're providing a list of all the fallen victims, which is so important to the families back home who probably have very little word as to what's happening to their young men.
The Y's work in the Civil War marked the beginning of its tradition of service on the battlefield. As soon as America entered World War I, the YMCA again leapt into action. At the time, the General Secretary of the National YMCA, John R. Mott, was an advisor to President Woodrow Wilson, who often looked to him for advice on international matters. On April 6, 1917, the very day the U.S. declared war, Mott sent a telegram to Wilson offering the full service of the YMCA. The Y's relief work would come to include everything from serving hot cocoa to soldiers to raising money for much-needed supplies.
The YMCA launches a fundraising drive under Mott's leadership, which eventually garners $200 million, more than $200 million.
Nearly 26,000 YMCA workers ran 1,500 canteens for the boys overseas, as well as 4,000 temporary huts for recreation and religious services. The Y volunteers, many of whom were women, coordinated massive shipments of preserves, socks, and even baseball bats. And when German U-boats made shipping goods across the Atlantic too risky, the Y built factories in Europe, including 44 cookie and candy plants to supply soldiers with sweets. But the Y's efforts were not without their critics. Unlike other relief groups, the Y charged soldiers for cigarettes, a fact that led to accusations of war profiteering. The Y's response was that they were simply trying to cover the enormous costs of their wide-ranging relief efforts, and that any money left over went into an educational fund for returning troops, the forerunner, it would turn out, of the GI Bill. Some soldiers also complained that the Y was mixing its religious mission with its relief mission.
The troops accused YMCA secretaries of trying to keep us from wine, women, and song. The YMCA, in the words of one leader, wanted to prevent World War I from becoming a venereal, disease-ridden festival.
Criticism of the Y led not just to changes in its war relief efforts, but to changes in the Y itself.
World War I has a very secularizing effect on the YMCA. They start out the war trying hard to win converts to Christ. By the end of the war, they're no longer doing that. And after the war, this continues.
Indeed, in 1933, the YMCA would officially abandon its Protestant evangelical mission. With the outbreak of World War II, the Y would once again send its volunteers to the front lines. Along with other volunteer groups, it helped found the United Service Organizations for War Relief Work, better known as the USO. The Y's humanitarian efforts in World War II would serve 6 million servicemen in more than 36 countries. And in 1946, YMCA General Secretary John Mott would be awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. But the Y wasn't just working overseas. Its wartime assistance was also needed on the American home front. Sometimes even Y volunteers themselves were among those in need. In the wake of the attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, anti-Japanese sentiment swept the United States. David Tatsuno, his wife, father, and children were among over 110,000 Japanese Americans on the West Coast who were forced to evacuate their homes and relocate to internment camps. After closing the family dry goods store in San Francisco, the Tatsunos found themselves confined to a camp in Topaz, Utah. Tatsuno was able to sneak an 8mm camera into the camp. These images provide a rare look behind the barbed wire.
Just imagine, you have to leave your home, you have to leave your pets behind, and then and going to a barrack, it's boring. But they had to make the best of it.
Many of the Topaz internees, including David Tatsuno, had been members and employees of a YMCA in San Francisco, a Y started by Japanese Americans to provide services for neighborhood residents and new immigrants. Believing their best hope for eventual release was to show that they were model American citizens, the internees put their Y experience to work. They organized clubs and recreational activities for the other internees. They taught classes and established a YMCA camp.
To be able to come and meet together with other young people under the YMCA banner and have their own meeting, that was quite a thing at that time behind the barbed wire. It meant a lot. It filled a big hole in their life.
Tatsuno believes that his years at the Y gave him an advantage over some of the others in the camp.
Sure, you could sit down and cry as you were behind barbed wire. We had to leave our homes and we had to leave our business, but that doesn't get you anyplace. But the Christian philosophy is to do what you can wherever you go, you see, no matter what. And that's what we try to do. And so the why, the philosophy helped.
In the years that followed World War II, the YMCA would find itself on the front lines of another battle, this one at home. The Y would come to play a paradoxical role in America's struggle to confront its greatest demon, racial inequality. America's Haven, the YMCA at 150, will continue in a moment.